So a few weeks ago, I put up a poll asking what franchise you guys wanted me to review next. The turnout was actually much higher than I was expecting. There was over 200 people voting, and the Exorcist franchise just narrowly beat out the Night of the Living Dead franchise. So it was pretty close. It was pretty damn close. I was waiting. I was trying to wait as long as I could, but there hasn't been a vote in like a week now. So like, all right, we're done. That's that. Here we go. And we're going to talk about the Exorcist franchise, starting with the first. Yes, I wish I had this in a better version than a DVD, but it's what I got. All right, I have them all on DVD, and these like freaking showcase things, man. These are silly, but that's what I got. That's what I got. So, The Exorcist. Holy shit. All right. So, The Exorcist is an absolute masterpiece, and I will not hear any other words on the matter. You can dislike the movie all you want. That's not going to take away from the fact that this thing is a genre-defining film. You know, I don't think that there can be any set rules of like criteria to consider something to be a masterpiece, but I do feel like there's a strong argument to be made that a film that completely defines its subgenre as the benchmark to compare every other film before and after it to, like even before it, from that point on, is a testament to it being what I would consider to be a masterpiece. Now, that, of course, isn't always going to hold up. There are going to be films that define their subgenre, and they're not masterpieces because that subgenre just doesn't have a masterpiece in it yet. But with a case like this, and a case like Jaws or something, I mean, you're not going to see an exorcism movie and not immediately compare it to The Exorcist. It's going to be the first thing you compare to, no matter what. It just is, because that's the defining film of the subgenre. Same thing with shark movies and Jaws. There's never going to be a film that comes out that's going to make a bigger impact in that subgenre ever. It's just not possible. And I mean, when you watch this movie, this is a time in film. This is why when I watch something like this, I actually understand why the horror genre is thought of as trash. And what I mean by that is that this was 1973, and this film was still, I mean, as controversial as the subject matter is and all that stuff, this is still a fantastic film. Like, this is art, man. This is a legit Oscar contending film. You know, as I said, there's going to be a lot of people who went to this, especially if you're like super religious. We'll get into that. But this is a legit, serious movie with fantastic acting. And, you know, during the 80s, there was just this slew of cheap knockoffs and rip-offs and trash and all this stuff. And even though I like a lot of that stuff, it hurt the genre as a whole. It completely put this taint on the genre, and it's taken forever for it to recover. I mean, if you really think about 80s horror, 90s horror, we actually as horror fans usually point to the 80s as the golden age of horror. And I'm not saying that there isn't some fucking wonderful stuff in there, but it was the decline in the general consensus. It was where everyone started to lose faith in the genre, and it just kind of became something that everyone dismissed outside of the genre fans, which it was a very small bracket of people. And for decades, it's kind of clawed its way trying to get back into being respected as a genre. And it's just, up until very recently, it never was. I mean, if you look at the 80s, the 90s, oh my God, forget about it. 90s horror, that there's very little, very, very little that's ever taken seriously and thought of as like genuine like film. But man, when I watch this movie, this film, it just kind of reminds me of how serious horror used to be and how respected it used to be. And when you went to a film like this, it wasn't just a bunch of people. I just would have liked to have been around in '73 when something like this came out. And to kind of get around the public and just kind of the overall feeling towards the genre. Because nowadays, it's, as I said, it's starting to come back a little bit. But let's rewind like 5-10 years. I've worked in a hair salon a long, long time, and I've talked to people about lots of movies and all that stuff. And man, you even bring up horror, people scoff. Ugh, trash. How could anybody support such garbage? And it's like really, really popular opinion. Like it or not. I mean, I know people will be like, I don't give a fuck. Like, they're idiots. This and that. That's fine. But there was a time when horror was extremely respected. And, you know, this was during that time. And this is thought of as the scariest movie ever made. I mean, what a fucking tagline to put. The scariest movie of all time. There you go. Of all time. That's it. That's the tagline of the movie. Man, that's ballsy. But, I mean, so many people said it back then. And wow, what a fantastic movie this is. I mean, the acting, the cinematography, there's literally nothing I could knock about this film. Just watching it again, everything works for me. The atmosphere, all of it. It's an incredible movie to watch and just to think back of the time. And of course, as I said, to think back of the time, 1973. This must have been a doozy, man. This must have really just knocked people on their ass when they went to see this thing. Because I feel like atheism and agnostics and stuff like that, and people who kind of independently think for themselves and don't have any religious ideologies, that's pretty commonplace now. But in 1973, like, people were mostly pretty religious. I don't know how many people were like closeted atheists or closeted agnostics or whatnot, but and I'm not saying that there's that there's not still a lot of religious people. There is, but just kind of the air at that time. Most people were thought of as religious, and saying anything otherwise would be met with scrutiny, to say the least. So going into this theater, and especially if you really, really, really believed hard, and there's still, of course, people that do, and that's fine. But and this speaks to them as well. But I just can't imagine going to the theater in 1973 and watching a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl jam a crucifix into her vagina with blood, coming out of it, and her screaming, "Let Jesus fuck you," and screaming at a priest, "Your mother sucks cocks in hell," which is still the greatest line of all time in any film to me ever. That's my favorite line in any film ever, because it's just so crude and it's so outrageous in the context, in the time period in which it was released, who it was said by, to who, all of that. It's just the perfect line of, holy shit, that's amazing. It's like the ultimate your mama joke. I love it. And just thinking about when it was said, the audience at that time must have just been absolutely mortified watching this. Having to listen and being subjected to such gross and disturbing behavior, and the thought of a little girl, this sweet, innocent Reagan McNeil, being possessed by Pazuzu, by the devil himself. It must have just scared. I mean, it did. We know it did. So I shouldn't say must. It scared the fuck out of people, and I completely understand why. If I was religious, if I really believed in this stuff, this film would be absolutely terrifying. And that even being said, me not even being religious or believing much, this film is still very, very scary. I mean, I don't get scared, but when I watch it, I know what is scary. I can feel it. I can sense it when I'm watching. I'm like, man, this film's freaky. This film's fucking scary. So, all right, let's talk about the movie itself. I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out there about the movie, kind of at the time in which it came out, and my feelings about it. Now, I got to see this in theaters when they released it with the version you've never seen, which is always funny to have on the top of the thing. Now that you've seen it, you're like, you're lying to me. You know I've seen you. I put you in my player and I watched you. How dare you lie to me? But I actually did. I got to see this, and I had seen it a bunch before I went and saw it in the theaters. So the added scenes really hit for me because, you know, when you go in, it's kind of like watching the Halloween TV version, and you're so on autopilot that when Linda, I've only seen the TV version once or twice. It's Linda who comes over, right? Linda who comes over to borrow like a blouse, and Lori has just come out of the shower or something, and then Annie calls, something like that. But that scene, and then when Loomis, and this is a scene I actually really like. I actually really like both sequences. I really wish they would have kept it in Halloween, but they cut them for time. But when Loomis goes before like the board, the committee members, the two guys, and he tells them what's going on, that scene, and then he goes to the room, that stuff is all so jarring to me because I'm on autopilot. And I never get startled, I never get scared, I never get anything. But I was sitting in the theater, it must have been, I don't know when this was released back in theaters. I want to say, if my memory serves me correctly, somewhere in my teenage years. I want to say maybe like 13, 14 to like 16 or 17, somewhere in that era. But I remember I went and saw this, and they had added all of these like background noises for surround sound. So there's like this really high-pitched ringing of the phone, and then there's all these people at the college campuses talking around you, and it feels like there's people behind you. But the most jarring thing by far, and of course we got to talk about this, is the spider walk scene. You know, when she finds out that Burke dies, and she's having her moment, and she throws herself against the wall, and Chris is just kind of like taking it in, like she's already dealing with so much, and now this happens, and there is kind of an indication that they might have been dating or like each other or something. I don't know why. That guy's fucking horrible. But regardless, this is her taste, and this is what she likes, and she's a lonely woman, so she can do whatever the hell she wants. So she's like kind of dealing with Burke's death, and then it usually just cuts to the next scene, and not knowing it was coming, not knowing anything about it, just sitting in the theater like, okay, this is kind of a slower moment, it's a depressing moment, and then it just kind of transitions into a normal moment, you know, just kind of pushing the story forward. And then just out of nowhere, she looks up the stairs, this music kicks in, and this kid's crawling down the stairs backwards really quick in this very awkward manner. Like the way the body moves is not the way a body would actually move, because of course it's not actually a body. It's like an animatronic or something along those lines. At least that's what I think. I don't know. I can only imagine that's what happens. Now, I love the sequence. It just startled the shit out of me in the moment because I was not expecting it being on autopilot from the film, which was great to see, you know, blood come out of her mouth and all that. It's scary. Now, taking a step back, and it's a great effect. It's a fucking nutty effect, and throwing it into this many, many years later, I think it's great, and I do love the scene. I do understand why they cut it, though. It's just a little too much too quick. It's like once that scene, there's no doubt at all from that point. And the next scene, they kind of cut to just her still being kind of in that middle ground area of what's going on. If you saw someone crawling down the stairs backwards like that, and blood pouring out of her mouth and all of that, that should have been a scene that was later in the film, like when she's full on Reagan possessed. Then there's just zero question. But it is a little too much. It's like going from like 10 to 100. It wasn't at 0, but it wasn't that high. And it just so dramatically increases in that moment. And then it kind of tries to go back down to 50. So it's an odd sequence. So I do get why it was cut from the film originally. I love it in here because it is a freaky ass scene. But I just feel like from the flow of the film, it actually kind of breaks it up a little bit. And it takes it a little too much too fast. And it doesn't, it actually hurts the arc of the tension building. Because the tension of a film in horror, obviously, is supposed to rise, climax, boom, over. All is one hard arc. And this is like going, boom, jolts, then kind of drops back down, and then comes and goes. So it's not really a critique, but I guess it kind of is. So while I like it that it's here, I understand the reasoning for why it was cut. And all right, so let's talk about this movie. So Max von Sydow's character here, Father Merrin, he's 44 years old in this film. And the makeup that was done on him was so fantastic, because Marlon Brando was originally, the studio wanted him, and the director was like, no way, this will turn into a Marlon Brando picture. Absolutely not. I can't have that happen. So they hired Max, and they put this makeup on him, and it actually hurt his career. I mean, I'm sure you know the stories, but yeah, he couldn't even get work for a while after it because it was so good that the studio execs that were hiring actors were like, this is a character that's supposed to be in his 40s, and you're trying to hire a guy who's like in his 70s or 80s, and they're like, no, he's not, that's just makeup. So it really did hurt his career for a little while, which I found really interesting, and it made me wonder, why not just cast an older guy? Like, I mean, it's weird how people are so against, like let's say Tilda Swinton playing a man or something, or playing the Ancient One, or playing like people get so up in arms when someone like white plays someone who's supposed to be black, or someone who's a male playing a female, or vice versa, or whatever that. But if a guy is cast as a super old guy, it's like, shouldn't they just have casted a super old guy? I mean, it really just comes down to acting. I mean, I know I would probably get blasted for that opinion, but it's in a testament to the amazing acting of Max von Sydow, that he can pull off this very, frail older man, but who's also like, it's almost conflicting. It's almost contradictory to itself, because he kind of comes in and he's stumbling. He's like Yoda in Attack of the Clones, where he can barely walk on the stick, and then he's freaking like, lightsaber fighting Count Dooku. It's just like this is almost this act, but when it comes down to the moment where he has to, it's like he's saving up his energy for this, and he comes in strong. And it's weird to think that he's only in the opening, which takes place in Africa, and then he's only in the very last sequence. So his character, and I mean, you look at the poster, you look at what this movie is kind of famous for as far as this image, and he is the Exorcist. He's barely in this movie. The Exorcist. I mean, that's the titular character. He's barely in this movie. I guess you could make an argument that Father Karras is the Exorcist, but I mean, Merrin is literally brought in because he's an exorcist, and the movie's called The Exorcist. So I find that kind of interesting. So yeah, he's out there in Africa, and I know a lot of people find this to be almost pointless or boring or whatever, but I just think it's such great imagery, and it kind of puts us in line with what's going on in his life, and what's going on in his mind, and what he's out there doing, and his dedication to all of this. So I don't mind it. Yes, would we have liked to have seen maybe a different exorcism he was a part of? We do get to see that in part 2, but that's for a different review. That's an interesting film. That's an understatement. Tubular Bells. I feel like this is just such an iconic score here. I think this was a song though before this film. I'm not a music expert by any means. I'm not sure I'm an expert on anything, but I know that it is now forever attached to this film, regardless of its origins. I know that whenever I hear this, it's The Exorcist instantly, and I love those shots. It kind of reminds me of Halloween, where Laurie's out there and the music's playing as she's walking down the windy streets and all that. Then when Chris is walking home and the wind's blowing and the music comes on, it's so good. It's so good. It's so gorgeous. It's amazing filmmaking. Linda Blair, the little Linda Blair in here, the little 13-year-old Linda Blair is just so adorable. She's so sweet, she's so innocent. You immediately like her, and the family dynamic, the relatable family is built so fast. Some films can take an hour to try to build that relatable family, and they never succeed. And then this film takes like 2 minutes to just have her mom and her like chasing each other around the house. And it's like, I get it. I buy into it. You got the tutor there. You've got the two, I think they outright call them servants in this. But they've got this rich, famous lifestyle that they live. But at the core, it's a mom and a daughter who really love one another. And you buy into it very much in just a minute. And that's what great directors and great actors can pull off. They don't need a lot of time to sell you on things. And then the Captain Howdy sequence. Here we go. I just reviewed Strangeland, and so when I hear the Captain Howdy thing, of course, I'm always thinking of the villain from Strangeland. Having a celebrity mom, or being a mom who's a celebrity and having a kid, or being a celebrity and having a kid. Both would be very tough, and both would be something I can't even comprehend. I don't even know what that life would be like, nor am I even going to try to imagine, but it would be weird. I mean, she comes into the room and she's reading a magazine, which she's on the cover of. That would be bizarre. It would just be so weird to see your face and your life plastered everywhere. It does not sound fun. It's like one of the downsides of that lifestyle, like just not being able to go to the grocery store without some paparazzi running up and taking a picture of you and being like, oh my God, they have cellulite, or look at how terrible they look. And it's like, dude, not everyone can look like a fucking rock star every 5 seconds of every day. Like, we have a petty society. We have an insanely petty society. I work in a salon. I mentioned this already many, many times. And I don't ever look at gossip magazines, but I look at them over the shoulders of my clients as I'm like blow drying or cutting their hair, and the shit they put in there. They're like, celebrities, they're just like us. And it'll be like pictures of Jeff Goldblum at the grocery store. And it's like, oh my God, you mean he eats too? He has desire for food. He craves subsistence. Holy shit, I did not know. I thought they were robots. Wow, how incredible. And then it'll just be like them at the beach, and they'll just be trying to sit there with their family having a good time, and they'll catch them in the most awkward position. They'll be like, oh, they're getting some rolls. Is it time for Jenny Craig? It's like, fuck, man. To be under that level of scrutiny at all times is just... It's mind-boggling. Anyway, all right. Reagan. I don't know what the message is behind the film. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of videos on YouTube, or dissertations online if you can read into, of the messages within the film of this is because Chris is asked in the film if she's religious, and she basically says no. And her husband have gotten a divorce, which has pulled Reagan kind of apart. She's vulnerable in this state, and she has no religious affiliation, so there's nothing to protect this sweet, innocent girl from demonic forces. So she's kind of like an easy target, so to speak, for Pazuzu to come in and possess her. And so it's almost like divorce and not having religious beliefs is a sin, and if doing so, you are susceptible and an easy prey for demonic forces to inhabit you. Or they'll take over your children, which is even scarier. I mean, you can scare someone into doing something because you're threatening them, but you threaten their children, they're going to listen to you even tenfold. So, I don't know, subtext of this and whatnot, if that's what it's going for. Probably is. I just, when I look at that stuff, I try not to read too much into stuff. I really just kind of try to enjoy the film and take what it is saying almost at face value. Not that I'm incapable of diving deeper, but just watching this, I was thinking about that, like, oh, she's outright saying she's not religious. She's saying she just got a divorce, that kind of stuff, and you're like, I think I get what they're going with here. Burke is such an odd-looking son of a bitch, and the actor died right after this movie was made from the flu. But he is a weird-looking dude. He kind of looks like Dudley Moore, but like cracked out. I'm not sure why this is her pick when she's this, the way the detective talks to her, she's like a sex symbol of her generation. And here she is screwing this weird-looking director dude. Yeah, I don't know. But people have their tastes, and who am I to judge? What is in the attic in this movie she keeps hearing up there? What is that? Is the demon just like knocking stuff around upstairs and then it finally possesses Reagan? I don't know. Who defiled the statue in the church? Was that Reagan? Who put tits and a cock on the what, the Virgin Mary or something, whatever that statue is in the church? What is that? Who did that? So I have some interesting questions here that I'm not sure of in that moment. Father Merrin. Father Merrin is a great character. He's so torn. He's got so many layers to him. He's lost his faith. He's dealing with his mother's age decline and his, inability to properly take care of her, and her ending up in a state hospital, essentially like a fucking loony bin. And he goes there and he's just trying to find forgiveness, but he wants his own life, and he's losing, all of his faith, which is essentially his identity. But he was always combating versus science and religion, because he was sent to become a psychologist at Harvard. And of course, psychology deals with a lot of mental issues that can kind of explain away. And this is why he talks about how exorcisms aren't really a thing anymore, because at once upon a time, we used to think of mental illness as possessions. And him studying the mind and all the things that he's went through, he's like, I'm starting to believe there really isn't anything. And this is just a complete test of faith in this movie. This is the ultimate test of faith. And Merrin has to fight through so much in this movie. And the acting from the dude in this, just fan-fucking-tastic. And his dialogue, his little interaction sequence with the detective, who doesn't play a major role. He does play an important role because there would be an investigation to why there was dead bodies. Usually movies kind of brush over that kind of stuff, but I do love that added stressor of him coming to the McNeil house and telling Chris, like, just so you know, your daughter probably killed your boyfriend. And her just being like, holy shit, having to cover for her daughter whilst also knowing she probably did it. It just adds to the stress level that's already at, higher than you can imagine for this woman. So, and I love it, just his dialogue going back and forth with Karis, sorry. Did I say Merrin this whole time? I thought I said Karis. I hope I did. I'll be pissed off if I didn't. But I'll go back and rewatch this. Karis. Anyway. But yeah, but his little scene with Karis here, where they're talking about movies and he's talking about all that, I love it. That sequence is fucking great. I could watch almost a whole movie of them just bantering back and forth like that. I know some people will just find that boring as all hell and almost pointless to the story, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And oh man, when Reagan comes out, you're going to die up there, and she pisses herself. That's pretty shocking. The bed shaking when she jumps up on the bed with her, that would be a moment where you'd be like, okay, something is seriously happening. I like that's where Chris's transition happens. Like, okay, from here on, I'm telling you guys, I don't care what you say, there's something going on. And then, I mean, this is essentially a movie of a woman who has put her faith in Western medicine, and Western medicine fails her. That carotid freaking like puncture sequence where they're draining whatever out of her, I thought it was I was trying to look up what that procedure is called, and I couldn't get a specific thing on it, but just putting it in there and pulling it out and the blood squirting, that scene, I don't get uncomfortable, I don't get squeamish almost ever, but for some reason that carotid artery just fucking popped and just it just, every time I watch it, I force myself to watch it because I don't want to ever be a wimp, but I do. I sit there and I'm like, oh god, this is so fucking horrible, just because it's so relatable. It's so something we know, we can have done to us. That's not the way they do those anymore, thank God. But just a doctor popping that in there, and it just fucks me up every single time. And then the docs just straight out are like, we don't know what's going on. And then the next sequence is they bring in the psychiatrist, and they're just, or not the psychiatrist, I'm sorry, that's a different sequence. But when she's shoving the crucifix into her pussy, and she's yelling, "Let Jesus fuck you," and then she grabs her mom's face and shoves it into her bloody pussy, and is like, "Lick me." That's such an inappropriate, ridiculous sequence that I just can't believe got passed through in 1973. It's just crazy to me. Fucking nuts, man. Anyway, and I already said all this stuff. I like that the docs are actually the ones that suggest an exorcism, because they find it to be almost a suggestive placebo of sorts. Like, even though we think this is bullshit, there's some kind of suggestive innuendos in it that make the mind kind of come back to itself. So we're coming at it from a logical, scientific perspective of how an exorcism could work, because there's no demons and there's no God and there's no nothing, because this is how the doctors would think in that scenario. But they're like, maybe this will work. Maybe it'll get through to whatever's screwing up her mind, and it'll kind of do a reset. So I like that the doctors are actually the ones, the Western medicine doctors are actually the ones that turn her to faith, which you never see. You never see that ever. It's always the doctors being like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with her. Sorry, moving on. There's no other options here. So I love that stuff. And then when Regan is talking to Karis, and he's like, well, why don't you just break the straps for her? And she's like, too vulgar display of power. I like that line because it reminds me of a great Pantera album, but also because I like that the devil in this just is kind of obsessive with not being a puppet. He's almost like, he never wants to be what's told. He could do anything that's asked of him at any moment. Because when Karis asks, like, what was her maiden name or something, Regan just kind of, or Pazuzu, I don't know what to call her in this moment, but she kind of just looks at him just like, I'm not fucking playing your games. I'm not answering your shit. Like, I know who I am. I don't got to prove nothing to you. You'll believe soon enough, son of a bitch. Like, I like that, because there could be that moment. And then there's the moment where he throws the holy water, and she's like flailing around. And I have to wonder if this sequence is she is trying to get Karis to doubt himself and doubt this moment, so that he won't go and try to get an exorcism to be performed. But at the same time, I feel like Pazuzu is actually like wanting an exorcism on him. It's weird, but also I had to think, like, if a priest is holding water and says it's holy water, doesn't then it become holy water? I know that there's like a blessing and a ritual to doing it, but for me, if a priest was holding a thing of water and he says this is holy water, for me that would like instantly make it holy water. I mean, that's really all you're doing is a priest is kind of blessing the water. So him just saying it's water or holy water, to me would be that'd be it. That'd be holy water, right? But as I said, I know there's some actual ritual there, some kind of seance, something that they do to bless the water. And yeah, she says she's the devil himself. So I like that Karis kind of points that out. Like, that's equivalent of someone saying they're Napoleon bone apart. It's like, we're not just saying we're some random demon here. We're saying this is absolutely the devil. Reagan just goes dramatic. This is another thing. It just goes from 0 to 100. So Reagan's like normal and she's kind of beat up a little bit, and then it goes to like that Reagan face we're aware of. This doesn't look like her. It looks like a straight up demon when he comes in the room, and it's like, whoa, okay, she's dramatically taking a turn for the worse here. I love the line, what an excellent day for an exorcism. Of course, it reminds me of Apocalypse Now. But it just, yeah, I love the line. I love the way Reagan delivers that, even though I'm not her voice, but still, I love it. The backwards speech would pretty much immediately make me a believer. There's no way that this little girl could say that shit in reverse there. The help me written on the stomach, of course, that would also be the holy hell. And then when Merrin pulls up, when they finally get him to come, and you see the eyes, the close-up of his eyes, great shot, but she like senses, oh shit, this is going down. And then you hear, this is where I'm saying, like, I feel like she's calling Merrin out, because when he plays the audio, when Karis plays the audio in reverse, it's saying Merrin's name. So it's like, it's almost like the devil wants a rematch. It's weird. It's like the fighting for this girl's soul, and it needs to go to bat with the big timer. So it like calls out the last real exorcist. It's pretty cool. And yeah, you're an hour and 40 minutes into a 2-hour movie before the exorcist actually shows up. Stick your cock up her ass. Oh my god. Some of the shit that's said here, it's great. It's interesting that his last exorcism, or one of his exorcisms, lasted months, but he does this one in a night. Now, granted, 2 people have to die. Now, if you take the third one as canon, I guess, spoilers for the third one if you haven't seen it, but Karis doesn't technically die, but that's probably because the devil's keeping his body alive and his actual body died. But yeah, I mean, Merrin didn't die for the last exorcism, so I guess if you're willing to give your life, you can get it done in a night, but if you want to live through it, it's going to take months. So it's just how fast you want to get it going. How did he die? That's what I'm curious about. Her lifting up off the bed and all that shit, the stuff he saw there there would be no doubt from that point on, if he would have lived through that he'd have faith forever. You saw that. If I was in that room and I saw that shit, that would immediately make me a believer. Instantly. I see anything like that, boom, you've got my faith forever. Seeing the Pazuzu statue behind her, interesting. I don't know really what the symbolic meaning of that all is, but she's like worshiping it, but isn't it her? But is the statue look exactly, is that supposed to be him, or is that the bust of him? I don't know. And it tries to continue to keep exploiting the weakness of the guilt he feels towards his mom, which is a great play by it, and that's a great setup for the whole movie. How did Merrin die? I mean, we see in the second movie that she reached into his heart, like telepathically, and crushed his heart. But it happens off screen, and it just kind of comes in and he's dead. It's like, oh, Merrin's dead. He's only been in the movie 5 minutes and he's already dead. Interesting. So the Exorcist doesn't even do the exorcism. That's why I say there is a good case here that Karis is the exorcist, because then he grabs her, take me, and when it's passed over, he fights it, and his faith is so strong that he sucks it back in for a second, and in that moment sacrifices himself for the greater good of everyone and throws himself out a window, killing himself. And then a priest comes and tries to absolve him of his sin, because he's still kind of clutching and alive. And then, yeah, Reagan is none to the wiser here. She doesn't remember any of it. Probably good for that. And they decide to move. I love that. Like, yeah. And then this necklace. I thought that was going to play into the next movie. It really doesn't, but it's kind of a symbol of Merrin. Or Karis. Yeah. So, anyway, fucking amazing movie. Anyone who says different, it's your opinion. It's totally fine. But this is one of those movies that I will not hear that it's not awesome. There's plenty of movies that I've watched, like Rosemary's Baby, that I personally don't care for, but I look at it and I go, I'm not going to ever argue that it's not a good movie, that it's not a well-made movie, that it's a, you know, a classic. It is, regardless of what you think. And this is a fucking amazing movie. Anyways, I gotta go get to the Joker. It's gonna start here in like 5 minutes, but that was fun. That was fun. I watched The Exorcist 2 already, and I look forward to talking about it tonight. All right, adios.